He was born in Roswell, New Mexico, the town that 4 years later would become the most famous UFO legend in American history. His father broke the sound barrier for the U.S. Air Force and could never once tell his son he loved him. A record label told him his songs weren't strong enough. 2 years later, one of them became Peter, Paul, and Mary's only #1 hit in their entire career. He wrote the most famous love song of the 1970s in roughly 10 minutes on a ski lift, about a woman whose bed he would later cut in half with a chainsaw. He passed every test NASA gave him to be the first civilian in space. He was, by his own account, a leading candidate. Then, a president made a phone call. 73 seconds after liftoff, the person who got that seat was dead. He sold over 33 million records. He won exactly 1 Grammy in his entire life. He didn't live to hear his name called. They gave it to him after he was dead. The plane that killed him was bought 15 days before the crash, built from a kit by a man he'd never met, with a fuel valve placed in a spot the original designer never intended. His final words on the radio were calm, polite, technical. "Do you have it now?" Then the signal vanished. This is the story everyone gets wrong about John Denver. The dates are real. The NTSB report is real. The chainsaw is real. What people still argue about is whether one of the most beloved entertainers in American history died in a freak accident, or in a sequence of decisions any sober pilot would have refused to make. This is John Denver's real story. Number 1, the boy who couldn't belong anywhere.
Yesterday behind him, you might say he was born again. Might say he found
His birth name was Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. He was born on December 31st, 1943, New Year's Eve, in Roswell, New Mexico. The ironies start immediately. His father, Henry John Dutch Deutschendorf Sr., was a U.S. Air Force pilot. As a major, Dutch would later set 3 international speed records in the B-58 Hustler bomber, one of the fastest planes ever flown by the U.S. military. He was eventually inducted into the Air Force Hall of Fame. Dutch could break the sound barrier. He could not tell his son he loved him. In his 1994 autobiography, Take Me Home, John described his father as a stern man who simply could not show affection. Dutch was hard drinking, distant, quick to anger, and the family moved constantly. By the time most kids had a best friend, John had been the new kid in 5 states and 1 foreign country. He once tried to run away from home. He didn't make it far. He later admitted something simpler and sadder than running. He grew up feeling like he should be somewhere else, but he never knew where that somewhere else was. The only place he was happy was his grandmother's farm in Corn, Oklahoma. There were animals, country music on the radio, stars you could actually see. And one day, his other grandmother gave him a 1910 Gibson acoustic guitar. He was 11 years old. That guitar was the first thing in his life that didn't move when his father got new orders. The first thing that belonged to him. Number 2, the name the industry made him change. In 1961, the same year his father was setting world speed records in the B-58, John graduated from high school in Fort Worth, Texas. He enrolled at Texas Tech and chose architecture, the respectable profession, the kind of degree a record-breaking pilot's son was supposed to chase. He lasted 2 years. He played in a folk group called the Alpine Trio. He performed in local clubs. He did everything an architecture major was supposed to do, except actually want to be one. In 1963, John dropped out and drove to Los Angeles with 1 guitar and almost no money. He played folk clubs. He auditioned for groups. He was nobody. Then, in 1965, 2 things happened in a span of months that changed his life. Both of them ugly in their own way. The first, Randy Sparks, founder of the New Christie Minstrels, told him point blank that Deutschendorf would not fit on a marquee. The name had to go. So Henry John Deutschendorf Jr., the kid whose father had a name carved into Air Force record books, picked a new last name from the capital city of his favorite state, Colorado. He became John Denver. He erased his father's name from the front of his career. The second thing, Chad Mitchell, leader of the Chad Mitchell Trio, one of the biggest folk acts of the era, left the group to go solo. The trio held auditions to replace him. According to the John Denver Foundation, he was chosen out of roughly 250 hopefuls. 249 other singers got the rejection that day. John got the seat. He became the lead voice of what was rebranded the Mitchell Trio, and members of the group later said the Denver-fronted lineup outperformed the original. Then John wrote a song. He called it Babe, I Hate to Go. He made copies of it as Christmas presents. His producer, Milt Okun, took the demo and handed it to another act Okun was producing, a folk trio called Peter, Paul, and Mary. They renamed it. They called it Leaving on a Jet Plane. In 1969, that song became Peter, Paul, and Mary's first #1 single in their entire career. It would also be their last. The man who wrote it was about to be left behind by his own group. The Mitchell Trio dissolved. John was 25, married, a hit songwriter on someone else's record, and once again, he was nobody. He signed with RCA. They released his debut album. Almost no one bought it. Then his second, then his third. Both flopped. By 1971, the boy who picked Denver as a stage name was on the brink of becoming a footnote, a guy who had given his biggest song away. And then, one night in Washington, D.C., he broke his thumb. #3, the 6 a.m. song that changed everything. In 1970, John was performing in Washington with two friends, a married couple named Bill Danoff and Taffy Nevert. After their show, they invited him back to their apartment. On the way, John was in a minor car accident. He hurt his thumb badly enough that he could barely play guitar. He showed up at their apartment around 3 a.m. anyway. Bill and Taffy played him a song they'd been working on, written on a trip down Clopper Road in Maryland. Neither of them had ever set foot in West Virginia. They were planning to give the song to Johnny Cash. They played it for John. He stopped them. By 6 a.m., the three of them had finished it together. The next night, they performed it at a club called the Cellar Door in Georgetown. The crowd demanded a 5-minute standing ovation. John brought Bill and Taffy to New York to record it with him. It was released on April 12, 1971. Take Me Home, Country Roads peaked at #2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It went gold in 4 months. In 2014, the state of West Virginia made it one of 4 official state anthems, about a state none of the 3 writers had ever been to. The album it came from also contained Sunshine on My Shoulders. That song would later go to #1 on its own. In a span of about 3 years, John Denver went from broke folk singer to one of the top-selling recording artists on earth. Annie's Song. #1, Thank God I'm a Country Boy. #1, Calypso, written for his close friend Jacques Cousteau and his ship. #2, by 1974, he was named Poet Laureate of Colorado. He performed at the White House. He sold out arenas. He starred in the 1977 film Oh God alongside George Burns. He hosted television specials with Frank Sinatra and Placido Domingo. He had everything, and he was already starting to lose it. #4, 10 Minutes on a Ski Lift. By the early 1970s, John's marriage to Annie Martell was in trouble. They had married in 1967, when John was still nobody. Annie was from St. Peter, Minnesota. Quiet, down-to-earth, not built for the kind of fame that came at her husband at full volume after 1971. She felt insecure, overwhelmed. They tried to have children and couldn't John was found to be sterile. They eventually adopted 2 kids, Zachary in 1974, Anna Kate in 1976. But before the adoptions came the separation. In 1973, John fled to Switzerland for 6 days. Annie said it felt like 3 months. She would wake up at 4 a.m. and cry until she went back to sleep that night. She finally called him and told him, in her words, that love is unconditional. They came back together. In January 1973, John went skiing in Aspen. He took the Ajax chairlift up Aspen Mountain, his thighs still burning from a run he later called totally exhilarating. He looked out at the mountains. In roughly the time it takes for a chairlift to climb Aspen Mountain, about 10 minutes, he wrote the entire melody and lyrics of Annie's song in his head. He skied to the bottom. He raced home. He picked up his guitar. He played it. It became a #1 single in 2 countries. Annie said it began as a love song he gave to her, but she came to feel that for him, it became something more like a prayer. It wasn't enough. By the late 1970s, John was on the road constantly. Annie wasn't. He admitted in his autobiography to repeated infidelities. There were drugs in the 1970s, and the slow grinding away of 2 people who had married before either of them knew who they actually were. In 1982, Annie filed for divorce. The story you've probably heard about that divorce is real. It happened. While they were splitting up the property, John drove home in a rage. According to his own autobiography, he tells this story himself. He picked up a chainsaw. He cut a corner off the kitchen table. He bisected the dining room table. He went into the bedroom and shredded the headboard. He cut their marital bed in half. Annie has spoken publicly about the marriage's darker moments. She has said the man who wrote Annie's song and the man at the end of that marriage felt, to her, like 2 different people. That is the part of John Denver almost nobody who hums country roads actually knows. Number 5, his father, finally. There is one piece of John Denver's story that is genuinely beautiful, and it does not involve a hit song. In the mid-1970s, John took up flying. It was the one thing his father had always loved. The one language Dutch Deutschendorf actually spoke fluently. So Dutch, the Air Force Hall of Fame pilot who had spent a lifetime unable to tell his son he loved him, taught him to fly. In the cockpit of a small plane, finally, the 2 of them found a place where they could be father and son without the speed records and the silence getting in the way. By the time he died, John had logged more than 2,700 hours of flight time. He held ratings for single-engine, multi-engine, glider, and instrument flight, plus a type rating in his own Learjet. He collected vintage biplanes and aerobatic planes. His father died in 1982, the same year Annie filed for divorce. In the cruel mathematics of that 1 year, John lost the only 2 relationships in his life that had ever truly belonged to him. What he kept was the flying. Number 6. The seat Reagan gave to someone else. By the early 1980s, John was no longer just a singer. He sat on the board of the National Space Society and helped design NASA's Citizens in Space program, the initiative that would eventually let an ordinary person fly on the space shuttle. In 1985, NASA awarded him the Exceptional Public Service Medal. He had built the program. Now he wanted the seat. He wrote a 3-page letter to NASA volunteering himself. He passed every mental test. He passed every physical test. Denver himself said in 1986 he believed he was the leading candidate to be the first civilian in space. Then President Ronald Reagan publicly announced that the first citizen in space would be a teacher. A 37-year-old social studies teacher from Concord, New Hampshire, was selected from over 11,000 applicants. Her name was Krista McAuliffe. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Cape Canaveral. 73 seconds later, it broke apart over the Atlantic. All 7 crew members were killed. John Denver had been one of the leading candidates for that seat. He wrote and recorded a song called "Flying for Me," dedicated to all astronauts. He performed a benefit concert that raised $50,000 for the families of the Challenger crew. But here is the part of the story almost nobody knows. He didn't stop trying. He went to the Soviet Union and approached the Russians about flying him to the Mir space station. They reportedly quoted him a price, by some later accounts, around $10 million for a 7-day mission. He would have to learn Russian and train near Moscow for a year. He was prepared to do it. The deal collapsed for reasons that remain unclear. The man who survived the Challenger by being passed over kept trying to find another way into the sky. In one of those attempts, he would die. Number 7, order, violation, revocation. He flew anyway. The night his second divorce was finalized, John Denver was arrested for drunk driving. That was 1993. To understand how he got there, back up. In 1986, John was performing in Australia when he saw a singer named Cassandra Delaney perform on stage. She was 25. He was 42. Within days, she had flown back to Aspen with him. In August 1988, they married on a mountaintop above Aspen. 9 months later, in May 1989, their daughter Jessie Bell was born. A child everyone, including John, had been told he could never father biologically. That part was a miracle. The marriage was not. In a 1995 interview, Cassandra described threats, jealousy, and heavy drinking. She said John told her she would be left with nothing. They separated in 1991 and divorced in 1993. The custody fight reportedly cost more than $3 million in legal fees. Cassandra was awarded primary custody of Jessie Bell. For his part, John wrote that Cassandra managed to make a fool of me from one end of the valley to the other. Both of them were, by their own admission, miserable. In August 1994, while still on probation for the first DUI, he crashed his Porsche into a tree in Aspen. He was charged again. In October 1995, the Federal Aviation Administration ordered him to abstain from alcohol if he wanted to keep flying. In 1996, the FAA determined he had not abstained and revoked his medical certification. Order, violation, revocation? He flew anyway. Number 8, 15 days before the crash. On September 27, 1997, John Denver bought a plane. Not just any plane. An amateur-built experimental aircraft called a Rutan Longuise, built by someone else from a kit, completed in 1987, modified along the way. Tail number, N555JD. He bought it from a local veterinarian. 8 days later, on October 5, 1997, John performed at the Selena Auditorium in Corpus Christi, Texas. Audience members were ordered not to film for more than 20 seconds. One radio employee ignored the rule and captured most of the first 2 songs before security threw him out. That footage is the only video of John Denver's last performance. He played Boy from the Country. He played Amazon. Witnesses said he seemed at peace. That was the last full concert of his life. He was 53. The summer before, he had recorded a children's album for Sony Wonder called All Aboard. It would later win him the only Grammy of his entire career. He would never know that. Number 9, October 12, 1997. The crash that killed John Denver was not the kind of crash that needed to happen. On October 11, 1997, the day before the crash, John took a half-hour orientation flight in his new long EZ. Just 30 minutes. His total experience in that specific airplane, about half an hour. The aircraft had a problem he and the mechanic had already identified. The Long Easy's designer had originally placed the fuel selector valve between the pilot's legs. The builder of this particular aircraft had instead installed it behind the pilot's left shoulder. To switch fuel tanks mid-flight, the pilot had to twist his entire body 90 degrees, take his hand off the controls, and reach back over his shoulder. The fuel gauges were also mounted behind the seat. The pilot couldn't see them while flying. The mechanic had given John an inspection mirror so he could glance at the levels. The day before the crash, John and the mechanic had tried to extend the valve handle using vice grip pliers. It hadn't worked. He still couldn't reach it while strapped in. On the morning of October 12th, the mechanic told John exactly how much fuel was on board. The left tank, less than a quarter full, about 3.1 gallons. The right tank, less than half, about 3.25 gallons. The mechanic offered to refuel the plane. John declined. He said he would only be airborne about an hour and didn't need it. He took off from Monterey Peninsula Airport at 5:12 p.m. He performed 3 touch-and-go landings, practice approaches where the wheels briefly touch, and the plane immediately takes off again. Each one burned more fuel. Then he departed straight out to the west, over the Pacific. A few minutes later, his right tank ran DRI. To switch to the left tank, the one with even less fuel in it, he would have had to twist 90 degrees in his seat. According to the NTSB final report, as he turned to reach the valve, his right foot likely pressed the rudder pedal. The Long Easy's controls are extremely sensitive. The plane yawed right and pitched up. Witnesses on the shore saw him flying about 350 to 500 feet above the water. They heard the engine sputter. The plane went into a spin and slammed into Monterey Bay at approximately 5:28 p.m., about 150 yards offshore. Close enough that witnesses thought it might be some kind of acrobatic move. Investigators reported his last words to the tower were calm. "Do you have it now?" There was no distress call. The transponder vanished. They tried to call him back. Nothing came. Cause of death: multiple blunt force trauma. Toxicology came back negative. No alcohol, no drugs. He was sober. He was 53, less than 600 feet from the same Pacific shoreline he had been writing songs about all his life. Number 10, the Grammy he never heard his name called for. Colorado Governor Roy Romer ordered every state flag lowered to half staff. The funeral was held on October 17, 1997 at Faith Presbyterian Church in Aurora, Colorado, officiated by a retired Air Force chaplain. The next day, a public celebration was held in Aspen at the Bayer Benedict Music Tent. Thousands attended. The tent had already been taken down for the season, so the service happened in an open-air bowl, under the sky he had spent his life writing songs about. His ashes were scattered in the Rocky Mountains. A few months later, the Grammy Awards gave him Best Musical Album for Children, for the Train album he'd recorded the summer before the crash. It was the only Grammy of his career. He won it dead. In 2007, the Colorado Senate made Rocky Mountain High one of 2 official state songs. In 2011, Denver became the first inductee of the Colorado Music Hall of Fame. In 2014, West Virginia made Take Me Home Country Roads one of 4 official state anthems, about a state Denver had never visited when he co-wrote the song. In Aspen, his first wife Annie helped build the John Denver Sanctuary on the Roaring Fork River. Native boulders were inscribed with the lyrics of his songs. Over the years, the lichen on the rocks has crept into the words themselves, slowly making the songs feel as alive as the trees around them. His estimated total record sales: more than 33 million units, 12 gold albums, 4 platinum, approximately 300 recorded songs. About 200 of them written by John himself. There is a ski run at Snowmass named Rocky Mountain High. There is a plaque at the top. It is the kind of memorial John would have actually liked. Not a statue, not a wall in a museum. A run on a mountain. The same kind of mountain where he wrote the most loved song of his life in roughly 10 minutes on a chairlift. Looking at a Colorado sky that, in his own words, was a blue you can only see from that altitude. This is the part of the story almost nobody tells. Right. John Denver was not the smiling, denim-jacketed children's album troubadour the parodies turned him into. He was a man whose father set world speed records and could not say, "I love you." A man who picked a stage name to replace the name his father had made famous. A man who wrote a love song in roughly 10 minutes and a few years later took a chainsaw to the bed where he had once held the woman he wrote it for. A man who passed every test NASA could throw at him to be the first civilian in space. And was saved from the Challenger only because of a public announcement made from the White House. He sang about flying because flying was the only conversation he and his father ever really finished. And in the end, the same passion that had finally given him a real relationship with his father, the cockpit, the sky, the open ocean off Pacific Grove, was what killed him. The plane was bought 15 days before the crash. The fuel valve was in the wrong place. The mechanic offered to refuel it. He said no. He had less than an hour of fuel and he flew west, into a sunset he never came back from. The same sky he had once written a love song into in roughly 10 minutes on a chairlift in Aspen. If this story moved you, hit the like button. Drop a comment with the first John Denver song you ever loved. Country Roads, Annie's Song, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Rocky Mountain High. We read everyone. And subscribe because the next legend we cover is someone whose final flight raises even harder questions than this one. Until then, keep the music alive.